If you mention Championship Manager to a group of gamers, chances are half of them are going to break out into a massive smile and start detailing just how much they loved the game, regaling each other with long and detailed anecdotes of their greatest runs and club legends who took some minnows from the middle of nowhere all the way to the Champions League, while the other half of people sit bored stiff and wonder just what the bloody hell these people are on. If you're into games and you like a bit of footy, well, you've probably got some cracking Championship Manager tales, or indeed Football Manager if you're still into the games now. You've spent your time in one of the most addictive games known to man, and you've got the war stories to prove it. These games are the undisputed kings of football management. Really, there's probably no other genre where the gap is so large between first and second. Once a creation of two Everton supporting brothers named Paul and Oliver Collier from their Shropshire bedroom over the summer holidays that wasn't intended for any audience beyond their schoolmates, it's now a whopping great monolith, something that's both a game and close to being an almanac of football, featuring just about any team that currently exists and every single person who's ever so much as kicked a neighbour's kid's ball back over their fence. In a way, it's the closest thing that the beautiful game has to cricket's immortal Wisden, only with an interactive element. There's basically nothing that you can't do in current Football Manager, to the point where for some folks it can almost be too intimidating. A game where micromanagement before a match can take even longer than it would take to watch said match in real time. For those people, including myself, they're more content to stick with what they know and grew up with. And chances are that means Championship Manager 0102, at least for me. And hell, it's got a long-standing fan website named after it and everything. Kim Justice is supported by 7 Squared. Beef up your wardrobe with their t-shirts and hoodies based on classic retro gaming designs. And Wireframe, the digital and print bi-weekly magazine that's all about indie and AAA game development and game creation. Click the links in the description for discounts on shirts and subscriptions. The people who might think that Champman fans need to bloody sort themselves out will likely wonder how the hell something that looks so dry can be so addicting for people. Whether it's Championship or Football Manager, the game has resolutely gone against all trends and technical innovations. Even the original Amiga title was utterly outdated in terms of graphics for 1992, almost any other Footy Mani title looks nicer, and basically 99% of the game has always been text. It took until 2003 and Championship Manager 4 for the game to actually include a 2D match engine. And when the game finally did go 3D years later, a lot of people were furious about it. All the Championship Manager 2 and 3 games feature nothing but a running text commentary, a whole host of canned phrases with players' names shoved into them, and the closest thing to graphical flair is the text box flashing when a goal is scored. For many people, this is the only true way to play the game. Who cares if it's only text when the tension and drama is so high? Every time the action stops for a bout of commentary, you don't know what's coming. Is your team about to construct a beautiful goal, only for the end shot to be blazed over the bar? And now the other side are coming at you, you're hoping for a tackle. Eventually you're just hoping for a foul even, and oh my god, the bloody keeper spilt the shot, but your defenders reclaimed it. Oh, thank god. And now he's going forward, but wait, he's lost it. The opposing team's forward shoots and it's a bloody goal. But wait, it's been disallowed. Oh, the flag was up. Oh, football, eh? Bloody hell. That's Championship Manager commentary. And yes, it's quite exciting. It's like a rapid fire and rather complex set of dice rolls, each new line adding to the tension. It is quite wonderful what you can do with so little. This is the sort of thing that gets us classic Championship Manager fans going, that makes us so passionate and fond of the games, and keeps us going at it years later, whether we're using an updated pool of players that brings any one of the old games right into the 2020s, or we're still kicking around with the same group of lads from any time between 1992 and 2004, depending on what version you love. It took people and critics a little bit of time to really learn to love it. It wasn't until the second iteration of the first game, Championship Manager 93, the first to use real players, that the series started to gather steam and sell copies. Even the sequel didn't necessarily receive a warm greeting. a flabbergasted PC gamer stuck 49% on it and basically said that this old load of crap from the Amiga days should be shoved into a care home. However, people didn't give a toss about any of that, and the game sold hundreds of thousands of copies. The 97-98 season update of CM2, which is where I came in, was the UK's best-selling PC game of 1997. Through not giving even the slightest shit about fashion, and also through being something of a heartwarming grassroots story of these two brothers and their own little company, Sports Interactive, creating such a tremendously detailed world of football, it became all the rage anyway. And yes, we do still talk about it a hell of a lot. Those of us who grew up with Championship Manager can happily bore the arse off of anybody who doesn't follow footy and doesn't see the appeal of this slightly tarted up collection of spreadsheets and words at a moment's notice, and we can make legends out of people who you'd likely never know if it wasn't for the game. The best thing about the series, and what I want to mainly focus on in this video, whether it's the classic game I know and love or the modern titles that are out now, is the finding, scouting, signing and nurturing of obscure players from Lord knows where. It's all about hunting down someone, paying a pittance for them, and watching as they become one of the best players in the world. The sheer size of the game's database utterly allows for this road to glory, and it resulted in the creation of a rather unique group of players, the Legends of Championship Manager. Most of the Legends of Championship Manager are players who didn't really amount to too much in real life. There's a few exceptions to the rule, of course, but if it wasn't for the game, most of these guys wouldn't be that well known, or even known at all. Many players could be classed as CM Legends, and sometimes it's quite a personal thing, although when it comes to CM0102 there's a good few names in particular that make people's eyes light up. Names like Mark Kerr, Kim Kellstrom, Tonton Zola Moukoko, Maxim Tsigalko and Cherno Samba. Just these five represent a good spread of talent. Of the quintet, only Kellstrom really went on to have a lasting career at football's top level, playing for the likes of Lyon and Arsenal, winning several honours as a player and being capped 131 times by Sweden. The others are a bit less known. Midfield monster Mark Kerr, 19 in CM0102's world, never ventured too far outside of Scottish football. Moukoko, a Congolese-Swedish central midfield linchpin, had his career derailed by personal tragedy, the death of his elder brother, and sadly spent most of his footballing years yomping around lower division clubs in Sweden and Finland, but CM fans still call him up just to thank him for their team's successes to this very day. In 0102, the Belarusian striker Maxim Tsigalko can be signed for peanuts from Dynamo Minsk and is soon able to mutilate just about every defence in the world. In real life, he never fulfilled his potential. He retired aged just 25 in 2008, was plagued by ill health after his football career, and sadly passed away on Christmas Day last year at the age of only 37. Yeah, it turns out that a few of the stories behind Championship Manager's legends are actually rather sad. And then, well, there's Cherno Samba. With the exception of just one other player who I've yet to mention, Cherno Samba is the textbook definition of a Championship Manager legend. The striker from Millwall is a feature in many lengthy stories of success in the game. You sign Samba when he's just 16 years old, and he quickly becomes just about the perfect striker. Simply put, a footballing god who is several levels above just about anyone that he plays against. Of course, this did not happen in real life. Samba's professional career saw him eventually play for the likes of FC Haka in Finland and FK Tonsborg in Norway, before he retired early due to injury. And yet he's incredibly well known amongst a certain set of people. How does this happen then? What goes into someone like Cherno Samba, who didn't amount to too much in his career, let's be honest, being absolute dynamite in this game? To be fair, a lot of it had to do with Samba having a hell of a lot of potential as a youngster. He represented England all the way up to the under-20s. His in-game stats and incredibly high potential as a 16-year-old player reflect that. It kind of makes sense for the game's research team to give him very impressive marks. Much like other CM legends, that potential was cut short abruptly. At one stage, Samba was basically set to sign for Liverpool and was even pictured with Len boss Gerard Houllier. However, he hadn't signed anything yet, and this picture angered Millwall. The deal fell through, Samba resented Millwall greatly for it, and soon found himself shipped off to Cadiz in Spain. While at Cadiz, at an incredibly low ebb and suffering from mental health issues due to the failure of the dream Liverpool move, he attempted to take an overdose but was fortunately found in time by his training partner. While Samba's career ended at 29, he harbours no resentment towards Championship manager. Indeed, it's brought him a fair bit of fame and recognition. Has he played the game? Well, of course. Not only has he played it, but he usually plays it and signs himself to see what happens. The game has quite a unique appeal for some of these CM legends, it seems. It offers a window to just what could have been. Swedish midfielder Kennedy Bakircioglu, another CMO 102 legend, never quite got over failing to impress Manchester United enough in a trial as a youngster, and has often spoken of spending many a night playing the game with himself at Man United and living out the career he hoped he would have in the game. However, this isn't always the case, and some players are less enthusiastic. Freddie Adu, not only a legend in CMO 304, but someone who was compared to no less a figure than Pele in the press, and basically had the entire future of soccer in the United States placed on his shoulders at the age of 14, harbours a fair bit of resentment towards the game. Just another part of the crazy hype that surrounded him went to his head, and resulted in a career that never came close to living up to the wild expectations. Adu is still only 32 years old, but was last seen in 2021 playing for, and ultimately being released by, third-tier Swedish side Österlen FF. This is the case for a lot of these CM legends, in fact. Tonton Zola Moukoko was at one point regarded as one of the best young players in all of Europe, and the likes of AC Milan were clamouring for his signature. It's quite funny, this game exists at a point where you could also spend not a whole lot of money to bring Cristiano Ronaldo or Wayne Rooney, both of whom were also 16 at the time, to your club. However, while they both tend to turn out quite good, they never reach the level of a Cherno Samba or a Maxim Tsigalko, or the legend of all legends, the one who we've yet to mention. For as great as all these players I've mentioned are, there is one other that's just a cut above the rest. In the world of Championship Manager 0102, this is a man who, once he reaches his prime, essentially becomes the greatest football player of all time. And that man is Tó Madeira. Tó Madeira can be signed by just about any team in the game, aged 22 years old, from the tiny regional side of Club Deportivo de Gouveia in Portugal. Hell, they're so tiny that you're probably going to need to ensure the maximum database is selected just so that he's even available. Much like most of the folk we've named, he's a striker. And while the others are perhaps a little bit quicker at reaching their best stats, in a few seasons' time Madeira is basically invincible. It's often a pretty worthwhile strategy to pick a team, buy Madeira for a few grand, go on holiday to let him mature for a few seasons, and then come back to basically beat everybody with Tó Madeira. This works no matter what. Even the best sides in the world will not have anyone who is on Madeira's level. In the lower leagues, he's basically a god among men right from the off. Putting him in an atrocious side like, for example, my own team Southend United, is going to make them infinitely better even if you don't buy anybody else. Amongst fans of Championship Manager, Madeira is revered on high. The ultimate striker. So what's the background of this player who you've most likely never heard of? I mean, obviously he didn't amount to too much in real life because otherwise you probably would have heard of him. And yet, you might well say he didn't amount to anything at all. As is the case with quite a lot of Championship Manager legends, they can't all be dual CM and real life footy legends like Vincent Kompany. Did he ever leave the regional club he came from? Did he end up potting around clubs in Estonia or Liechtenstein or North Korea or wherever? Well, no. In fact, the legend of all Championship Manager legends, that is, Tó Madeira, he never fully existed. Seriously, there is no such senior football player as Tó Madeira. Certainly not in Gouveia or anywhere else. Now, I mean, surely that's a mistake. This is a game that is after all revered for being as in-depth a football management sim as you can get, with intimate details about thousands of players. So with that in mind, how on earth does a completely non-existent player make it into the game? Well, there is an explanation of sorts, so let's go through it. Tó Madeira is the creation of one of the volunteers for Sports Interactive who dealt with Portuguese football teams and specifically dealt with CD Gouveia. Naturally, most of these volunteers would be expected to be quite familiar with the team in question, and so most of the players in the team are indeed real. The volunteer himself, a man named Antonio Lopes, had previously been a youth player at the club, so he was ideal for the job. Except that he went ahead and cheekily put himself into the game under his childhood nickname Tó Madeira, meaning of Madeira, as if he'd made the transition to senior football. Oh, and he'd become the best player in the world, easily capable of bursting the net over 60 times in a season at his peak. Antonio Lopes probably thought that no one would notice his little inclusion. Hell, he'd actually done it for the first time in the previous game, CM0001, putting himself and a couple of other childhood friends into the team, although his stats weren't quite as overblown the first time around and therefore he wasn't discovered. So if anything, he decided to be even cheekier the second time around by making himself into a soccer god and meddling with the primordial forces of nature. But naturally it didn't take long for Madeira to be found by players of the game and for message boards to light up with people talking about how amazing this Portuguese striker was that they just found in a completely unknown team and paid a pittance for. It was as if some Conference North team just so happened to have a Primera Gabriel Batistuta on their books. And in fact, it wasn't just fans who were discovering Madeira. By this time, Championship Manager was so respected not just as a game, but as a resource for finding footballers, that actual real-life football clubs were using the game as a scouting tool. Legend even has it that then Glasgow Rangers manager Alex McLeish's son John once tried to persuade his dad to sign a young player he'd discovered through the game in the depths of Barcelona's B team by the name of Lionel Messi. Although Alex swiftly dismissed his son's scouting report saying that this teenager was going to be the best player in the world or some stupid shit like that, and we were sadly robbed of the chance to see Messi trying to get the job done on a wet Wednesday night at Pittodrie Stadium. I'm getting off topic a little, but in any case I wager that CD Gouveia probably got quite a few faxes and phone calls from very big clubs indeed, inquiring about this Tó Madeira that everyone's been talking about, if he was on the books and what their asking price was, and they were no doubt quite confused indeed. So needless to say, it didn't take awfully long for Sports Interactive to find out about Lopes's meddling. It surprised him really, as he'd expected the studio probably had tools at their disposal to detect obviously fake and ridiculous players like Tó Madeira and swiftly wipe them out of the database, but instead he'd slipped through the cracks. He may not have been silly to think that this would be the case. With the game's hundreds of volunteer researchers being so utterly essential to the game, Sports Interactive had to keep a bit of an eye on them. Over-enthusiastic and somewhat biased researchers wildly overrating and beefing up the stats of the teams they supported was a problem SI and the Colliers often had to deal with, and this was an even more blatant case of that. However, this time around it just got overlooked. That and also he was hardly the first fake player in the game even. Not only is it an important part of playing CM as your career goes on, to use scouts and keep an eye out for regens of legendary players spawning after they retire with brand new names, because they almost always end up being amazing, but the database did have a few other little Easter eggs at various points, including the Collier brothers themselves, who could occasionally be found as players in Championship Manager games. Now, of course, the difference between these two and Madeira is that Paul and Oliver Collier are completely useless players who you wouldn't choose for your team even if they were the last two people with working feet on the planet. Not someone who can essentially crash it into the top corner from 40 yards with their little toe. And so the only way you can experience Tó Madeira is if you play the game with the original database out of the box. If you download the database update and patch it in, Madeira will naturally have been completely removed, never to feature in a Championship Manager game again. Not that him being a fake player has ever really stopped people from using him. Only those who are utterly insistent about keeping a completely authentic side on their books would pass up the opportunity to deploy Madeira in their squad. Sports Interactive themselves have embraced the legend somewhat. When a Sunday League team made up of past and present SI employees was formed in 2011, they called the team FC Tó Madeira, in honour of the game's best known fake footballer. Plenty of people have noticed some amusing parallels here. Madeira is essentially CMO 102's Cristiano Ronaldo, far more so than the actual Cristiano Ronaldo who is also in the game. Hell, he even comes from the island of Madeira, which just so happens to be where CR7 is from. The similarities are such that some have even wondered if Tó Madeira is actually supposed to flat out be Cristiano Ronaldo from the not too distant future, meaning that this unassuming football game is subject to a time paradox that even Hideo Kojima would gawp at. That's a rather amusing spin on the whole thing, although it is obviously not the case. It's just some guy screwing around. And in doing so, well, all he really did in the end was add his own part to the glorious legend and irreplaceable all-time classic footy management sim that is Championship Manager 0102. And there's not too much wrong with that really, is there? Bye for now! Thank you.